Mm.
Colds can be miserable.
Yeah. Yeah, but this year is funny, and the TV was reporting there has been very few cases of the normal flu.
Mm-hmm. Well, I
Yes.
think that's because we've all been being so careful, wearing masks and washing our hands and everything.
Yeah, and actually, this is the first hint of a cold that we have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, one more minute. Oh, there is Barry.
Hello.
Hello,
Hi,
Barry.
How you doing, guys?
Doing well, doing well. Happy to see you too.
A little vignette before we start. I took some shoes and pants and jackets down to the
Auxiliary.
mission on East Hastings, and I took Mimi along because she hadn't been out for a while, and she was absolutely blown away. It was a sunny day, and so all of the drug addicts and everyone were out lying and sitting and staggering.
Oh,
And
gosh.
she hadn't been in the downtown east side for many years, and she was absolutely appalled. So I decided a little treat on the way home. I'm from Montreal, and she spent time with me in Montreal. We actually lived there for 8 years. So I stopped in at the deli on the corner of 41st and Oak
Mhm.
to buy a couple of smoked meat sandwiches to take home for lunch. And I walked in, and the lady said, "Sorry, it's Passover. The restaurant's not open and we're not serving." And I thought, ooh, I should have known that.
All right.
So in case you didn't know, it's Passover.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Happy Pesach.
Yeah.
L'chaim.
Mhm. Yeah, yesterday in the news, they were reporting that one of the oldest pubs in Gastown was closing and moving to Main Street because there is no tourists coming,
Right.
and so the drug addicts have extended their reach.
I
Wow.
think that might be the COVID though, but you
Mhm.
know, people are just not going out as much. But
dear.
I have never
Hi,
been in
Brenda.
a pub, but I thought maybe I'll go down. We'll go down just because
And
it's going to close, right?
Now no, it's not closing. It's moving to smaller, cheaper premises in Chinatown.
Oh, okay. All
Mhm.
right.
If that's the Irish pub that Guillermo was just
Yeah.
referring to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
Main Street's happening, guys.
Mhm.
Yeah.
My
Well-
son lives down there, and it's happening.
Yeah, especially around King Edward and Maine, all that area have a revival, an herbal revival.
Yeah. My
Yeah,
son's
and
around Maine and
further
7th.
north along Maine as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, welcome.
Okay, Chris,
Thank you very
take it
much.
over.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome back. And our last session, let me get this going here. Okay. Whoop. What's my view is not very good here. I can't see anybody.
Okay, you have to click view
Yep.
side by side.
Yeah, I know what I need to do. I just got to do it.
Okay.
There we go. That's better. Welcome, everybody. This is our fourth session, and to continue, I'll tell you where I think we're going, and you can tell me where you want to go. uh, our 8 pillars that we've talked about. We started the discussion talking about how these interconnect in a variety of ways, and we nudge them, and they don't flow independently. They're a systems approach to when we think of this. We talked about the systems approach, the framework, and today, depending on how long we take, well, how to activate this and how do you use it. So this is what we've talked about 6. We're slightly behind, but that's all right. I thought we would have been finished these by now, but that's all right. So we talked about low levels of corruption, and that's from the traditional ways to friendships to small corruption in some countries to major levels of dishonesty or even violence. High levels of human capital, education, ensuring the community gets the education and that education they're able to use. Good relations with neighbors, and this is right from in your own home to international to communities, countries, free flow of information. We spent a long time last week talking about this. The internet really has changed. Traditionally, we thought of this as freedom of the press. Now the internet has really drastically changed that free flow of information. Right down to in Canada, the Vancouver Sun tells me I got a tax deduction because I subscribed to the newspaper this year. The federal government's implemented to try to subsidize print newspaper. Equitable, we talked the difference between equality and being equity. Or equality and being equitable. The difference, this one is equitable distribution of the resources. That doesn't mean everybody gets the same, but they have the fair right to it. Well-functioning government, and that is quite broad. And then we have two we're going to talk about. And after we talk about these 2, we can go in a variety of ways. We can talk about the report you got on Colombia, or an example of a project to implement this. There was also, I think it was Brenda, asked to talk about China? We can talk about China, but I'd like to go through these last 2 of the pillars, and then we can see how much time we got and where we want to go. Does that sound like a plan?
Mhm.
Yep.
Okay. Acceptance of the rights of others, and this has become very topical in the last year. I suspect that every organization, government organization, private sector organization, not-for-profit organization are reviewing their plans. I know Guillermo and I are very involved in Rotary, and Rotary International has created, like many organizations, diversity and inclusion committee, and reviewing all our rules and policies. Are we really up to date? Are we doing are we walking the talk? And every organization is doing that. So this is the Institute for Economics and Peace, their definition of acceptance of rights of others and how they use that to decide which countries are where they rate on positive peace. And this is one of the pillars that go into that in the rating of where Canada rates and other countries rate from the top to the bottom, where a country like Syria would be near the bottom. And we read through this, we can see, for instance, the conflict in Myanmar this certainly is involved in that conflict. Syria, in most conflicts, you'll find this in that. As I mentioned before, I spent some time in South Sudan, and tribal conflict is certainly in there. Oil overshadows it. Oil be exporting, the oil wells are in Sudan, and the pipelines are across South Sudan, or the other way around. Anyhow, one has the oil and one has the pipeline, so they don't always get along. Any comments on rights of others or this definition? Makes sense?
I think that when Michael wrote, he made a comment that in terms of the rights of others, even though, we look at the human rights edict by the UN, that the rights of others are such a generalized phrase that the way in which that's interpreted can also be interpreted uniquely by each organization that you're speaking to in terms of what they consider to be a right or a privilege.
Oh, yeah, definitely. We see that in Canada with Indigenous rights, which side thinks consultation. We've gone through the courts, and we will continue to go through the courts for many years on what is consultation on Indigenous rights and issues, and the same with others. The churches in the Fraser Valley that defy the public health orders. Some of this was in the court case, or they tried to make it part of the court case that they lost, I think, versus how the court interpreted it. But the court certainly did say that blocking was a breach of their constitutional rights in Canada, but it was a reasonable breach. So. Which makes Canada's constitution slightly different to many countries where we can breach constitutional rights if it's reasonable. I want to watch this quick video. It's a commercial for a car, but it has an odd message in it. So.
To test just how much attention the attention-stealing design of the new Skoda Fabia actually steals, we left one parked on this ordinary road in West London. We wanted to see if its sharp crystalline shapes, bold lines, and lower, wider profile would attract the desired level of attention. Will the 17-inch black alloy wheels stop passers-by in their tracks? Will the angular headlights attract the attention of other road users? Will a crowd gather to check out its fresh, sporty look? Well, not quite. But did the attention-stealing design distract you from noticing that the entire street has been changing right before your very eyes? Don't believe us? Have another look. Did you spot the van changing to a taxi? How about the scooter changing to a pair of bicycles? Or the lady holding a pig? Let alone the fact that the entire street is now completely different. Didn't think so. So there we have it. Proof that the new Skoda Fabia is truly attention-stealing.
It's a kind of a cute commercial, but the point there for our discussion today is we can be distracted. And when we talk about inclusion and diversity, when we focus on one thing, we sometimes don't see the elements around it, which on occasion can be good, or it could be bad when we focus only on one part of the debate. Any comments? Not that anybody here can buy a Skoda, so I guess it's they haven't been imported to Canada. I don't think Skodas are imported to Canada anymore. I haven't seen one in a long time. Any comments on that tricky little commercial?
Well, I for once didn't notice a change.
You didn't notice, or you did?
I did not.
Yeah, if you watch it a second time, then you start to see things. It's a tricky little thing, but and sometimes with diversity, the debate. What do we see? Do we only see one color? Do we only see one race? Do we only see one gender? What do we see that makes up our community? Here's another way to look at this discussion. The inner wheel are the things we really can't change. Yes, gender. A few people do change gender, or they would argue maybe they don't change gender. They were born with the wrong gender. So the inner wheel are the things we can't change. The outside wheel may be the things we can't change, but the things that do change. When we're thinking about inclusion and diversity, if you think about those that way, but all of these are elements that we talk about people in terms of these. We make assessments about people based on all of these, what family they're from, their level of education, their income, their religion, gender, mental, physical abilities. We make all sorts of assessments about people. This whole debate about inclusion and diversity is really focused on what we do if we include people, if we make these assessments, but we don't discriminate, we include people. That's what this is about. Any that are missing from there? Yeah, I was surprised when I got the union affiliation isn't, and then maybe it's because it's an American thing, and union affiliation is fairly low in the U.S. But we sometimes talk about people on their union. I don't know if there's any other major ones that are missing from the outer wheel. Does that make sense? Looking at in that way, the things we can, well, the outer wheel aren't necessarily the things, some of them we can change, but they more likely, rather than we can change, that do change over time. The inner ones, we don't.
The mental or physical ability, is that including psychological stuff?
I don't know. I probably shouldn't answer. I can't answer that. I don't know the person that drafted it, how much they included in that. Why do you ask?
Because that might also be another triangle, another piece of the pie.
Yep.
Would be your, I don't know, psychological capacity or something, or psychological evaluation. I'm not sure what the terminology might be.
Yeah, and mental
mental health, maybe.
Mental health could be probably on the outer one, because it changes over time for many people. Some certainly it will never change, but for many people it changes over time with age or treatment or circumstances.
What about celebrities and that kind of thing? People who are really, people's status in terms of their, popularity. Would that? I'm just looking to see if that fits in somewhere. Wonder.
Yeah, it's interesting. We make assessments about their celebrity status, whether they're a sports celebrity or a reality celebrity or a celebrity that the type we don't like versus the type we do, or I personally have dim views of the royal family, so all this royal gobbledygook doesn't do anything for me. Other people are quite have different views to me. That's just one of my views.
Well, if you notice, for example, I was thinking of how the perception can change of a celebrity in 1 second. Think, for example, of Bill Cosby.
Yes.
Yeah.
The mayor of New York would be another one.
Yep.
Como, that
The governor.
one of the heroes 6 months ago of COVID for what he was doing in New York, and now more and more comes out about him. Yeah, good point.
Now, Chris,
Yes.
totally unrelated. For some reason, in some of our screens, there is a gray bar to the right of the image and at the bottom of the image that you are sharing.
Yeah.
Oh, now there's another one.
At the top, yeah.
And I think let me stop.
Just move from the bottom to the top.
Yeah, I know.
Sorry.
Because I had the video parts activated, and
Ah,
it
That's
should-
better.
Yeah, it'll go away now. I know what it caused. Now find out where I am here.
Perfect. Great.
Getting back to your two circles, your wheel within a wheel. When you're trying to come up with groupings like this, you can't fall into the problem of getting minutia in there. If you want to make it useful, you have to keep them fairly big. So all the ones that we've been talking about possibly could go under work experience.
Mhm.
So for an actor, at the beginning, they're unknown, they get known and they fall off the work experience, or, you know, all those things. So I think if you take a look at all of these, there's a slot everything could fit into.
Mhm.
Okay, anyhow, just another visual for those that are visual learners. That circle may be of some value. Diversity, equity, and inclusion have become the words in the last year that were less common, and now they're very common in this discussion of how we look at it. And equality and equity and sometimes are used interchangeably, and we talked about the difference between them, but in this discussion we see it occasion. And remember, we're talking about positive peace. We're talking about how countries, communities, and areas do treat people, and how much diversity, equality, and inclusion is included, because that will ensure how much positive peace is in the community. One may be a frivolous way, but one way to look at diversity is the ingredients for baking. All of those things on that inner circle come together, and when we talk about diversity, all the things that make us different, whatever the 12, 13, 14 of us that are on this call today, we have a bunch of similarities and then a bunch of differences in where we come from. So thinking of diversity in this sense, and inclusion, bringing it all together. When we were able to bring all those diverse, our education, our religion or lack of religion, our ethnic origin, racial origin, sexual orientation, all those things, if we bring them together, this is when we get inclusion. And for our discussion of the 8 pillars, we're talking about inclusion, diversity, as repeating myself, but as an element of positive peace.
Just going back one slide,
Sure.
I didn't see a gender, because I think there's a lot of talk about the value of having including women in many levels of organizations, and I don't see it there. It seems to me it would be really basic, given that you know, we're about 51% of the population, I think.
Gender was in the inner wheel, Helen.
Yeah. Well, if you're looking at this,
oh, okay, yeah.
If we're looking right back here,
oh yeah, okay.
Gender's there.
Right.
It's not specifically sexual orientation is in this definition of diversity. Gender isn't specific. And back to inclusion, bringing all that together.
But it's more than just bringing everyone together. Like, we can put different people in the same room as we are in this call, okay? But if we don't have acceptance of the other person's difference, then inclusion doesn't work.
Right. Yep.
I have to take huge exception to the word acceptance. It's such a passive word. I think I would prefer to see our language embrace the word of embracing people and embracing the differences, rather than passively accepting differences.
No, I would, and language makes such a difference.
I think ideally that would be wonderful, but we've moved from tolerance to acceptance. And if we could eventually aim for embracing, it would be very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree with Brenda. I think that embracing is a step above.
Yeah, it
Okay.
is.
And requires and sometimes it will be unrealistic to expect, for example, I knew that my mother would never accept my point of view. So for me, when she tolerated my point of view, it was already a big step.
Okay. Before I go on to that pillar, go on to the next.
Just,
Yep.
Chris, just before we leave, I'm wondering if you have any observation or comment. There are various ways of inclusion and acceptance. In the United States, they've always been a mixing bowl. They accepted all sorts of diverse races and religions and beliefs, but with the underlying concept or rule that they were all going into a mixing bowl and they would all end up maybe slightly different colors, but all speaking the same language and holding the same values. Whereas in Canada, particularly since Trudeau won, we've had this concept of a vertical mosaic where we honor the differences and don't really compel people to change or embrace any one particular culture or language. We're supposed to honor all of them equally.
Yeah.
And
Do you have a
does either model actually work?
Well, after a fashion, the mixing bowl, as each new wave came into the United States, they were subject to persecution and ridicule and contempt. And eventually they mixed, and now people of those original ethnic backgrounds are reaching the highest levels. So I'm thinking of the Irish in Boston and New York, the Italians, Jewish people, Hungarians. They all were called dreadful names and treated badly, but at the end of the day, I think they have all ended up more or less valued and in the same place. I'm not sure that we're there yet in Canada. I'm not sure how valuable it is to continue to encourage diversity and not cohesion, but who knows? I just wondered if you had any comments.
Well, I wouldn't. First of all, I don't think we're that far from the United States. I mean, we can give examples, but each wave of immigrants in Canada, whether Eastern Europeans were discriminated against for the language and their food, and as the generations moved on, Sikhs or Chinese today, it's not hard to find animosity in Vancouver to recent Chinese immigrants. So I don't think we're that different. I think time changes things. The second, the third generations do change things. My parents were immigrants, but they were English British immigrants. But in some ways, my father was a working class, came to Canada at 16 as a laborer, and in the 1920s, when my father came to Canada, as soon as he opened his mouth, he was labeled because he had a particular British accent. And I'd say just probably into the 1950s, English accents in Canada were very important. People in the sense of where you were placed. So yes, he came from privilege. He was white. He was English, and that was made him as an immigrant many steps ahead of most immigrants. But he still because of his lack of education and his inner London accent, labeled him. And Canadians, including my parents, worked at getting rid of their accents as many immigrants do. And other immigrants do the opposite, try to embrace the heritage. So different. Kathy, go ahead.
Well, one thing I was going to say is that in the States, we usually called it a melting pot.
Yeah.
Instead of a mixing bowl. And
Sorry.
it just sounds a little nicer. And then the other thing about the accents, even though I was an invisible immigrant, a minority, as soon as I spoke the same thing with my accent, everybody would turn around and say, "Who is that?"
Yeah.
And I could feel the uncomfortableness that other groups must have felt. I mean, not to any degree like that, but I did feel a little bit uncomfortable that I had to constantly defend myself on being from the US, being an American, from other people's preconceptions of what we're like. So
I think
Uh,
that's true, Kathy. I think the accent does other people, whether or not you're a visible minority. The sound of your voice certainly does other
Yeah.
people. And
yes,
I think you're right. Also, the difference between Canada ostensibly and America is America was bragging about being a melting pot, whereas Canada tried to be a multicultural country. We didn't do so well with the Indigenous folks, but we learned maybe from them, maybe.
Sue?
I have two life experiences. One, when I went to Mexico for 15 years, I went down naively, early 20s. I'm going to learn perfect Spanish and they're just going to accept me as a Mexican. Well, how silly was that? And I realized if I lived there 150 years, I would never be accepted as a Mexican. So there's language, and then there's culture and cultural beliefs and experiences. Then I moved to France. So visibly, I could fit in till I opened my mouth. That was a dead giveaway. And then I came back to Canada and realized after all those years, I still have a Canadian accent. And when I went to the States, I thought, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake. I lived in these other countries. I'll just fit in really easily. No, because a whole bunch of unspoken cultural differences were there. And I was unaware of them initially, and it took me a while to get those figured out. So trying to fit in and meld, and it all comes back to you. My favorite person is Eleanor Roosevelt. Nobody can make me feel inferior without my permission. And so the attitude you have of yourself in that society, whether you celebrate your difference or not, is up to you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I agree with Rod that in some ways we're quite similar to what happens in the States. On the other hand, I must tell you that coming from abroad 40 years ago, I have a different perspective. Okay, when I arrived to the most francophone of all cities in Canada, Victoria, BC, okay, people will, if I spoke French to a friend, they will look at me and say, oh, but you're not from Quebec. And it was like a sigh of relief, okay? The generation of our daughter, Michelle, is colorblind.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and the generation of my grandchildren is even more colorblind. So we have made some enormous progress in that sense. I remember when doing my practicum in Victoria, I share a ride with another student who happened to be of Greek origin, and she told me how in elementary school everybody kind of turned her nose at, well, because I guess her closest smell of her home cooking or whatever, until multiculturalists came around, and then suddenly she was the star of the class. The teachers wanted her to talk about Greek food and Greek dances, etc. So we have, I think, attitudes can be changed.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Could I just add just one little comment? Something, because I always considered myself colorblind, but I have a friend who is Indigenous, and when Premier Horgan got in trouble for saying that he was colorblind as a child, he kind of got in a little bit of hot water there politically. And so I asked my friend, and she said it's because we want to be recognized for our culture. We don't want to be. It seemed to imply some kind of invisibility. So that's a new concept to me, and I just thought I'd throw it out there because I know when we were talking about Delta, we were talking about problems, and the one thing she also said is that she finds racism is so subtle now. It's not anyway. I just thought I would throw that out there.
I appreciate you saying that, Adrian. I have a son who's partnered with a Chinese woman, and I have a daughter who's married to a Black guy, and I have biracial grandchildren. And what I've learned is that people want you to see the difference. They just don't want to be judged by it.
Yes.
And it's a big difference. And so I think colorblind is an out of date term. And I think more appropriately, you just want to make sure that you do recognize that somebody looks however they look or sounds however they sound, but you don't generally label them as such. Like you don't stereotype people
Right.
because
Yeah.
of those things.
Yes. Yeah.
I have just a short story. I was born in Hamilton, and my father traveled a lot in his business, so he was away from home for weeks at a time. And when I was in grade 4 in Hamilton, walking home from school, all the kids came along the street singing, "Gail's dad's a German, Gail's dad's a German."
Oh,
I was horrified. I didn't understand hate like that, but I was very upset. And I went to one of the kids' houses crying and went up the back steps and said, "Bobby Gordon's calling my dad a German and he's not." And obviously it came from the family. And she was very upset that I had been upset. And of course I went home and my mother was upset. And anyway, they had a whole community conference on the street. It was because my last name is Nicholas. And I guess somebody said that's a German name. I mean, it could be Russian too. Happens to be English, but it could be many things. And I really felt that as a child. And why that would mean they would be mean to me. So it's actually, in retrospect, it's not a bad experience. It gives you a bit of empathy for potentially what's going on these days.
Well, I had a friend recently telling me their children at school were throwing racial terms around, and obviously they'd heard them at home because they were calling a Chinese kid with a racial slur for people from Pakistan. So the kids knew it was a derogatory, bad thing to say, but they hadn't, the kids hadn't quite fit in that, it was the wrong country, the wrong race, but they were bullying or picking on the kid because she was different. Those teachers probably got a better idea where kids get these terms or these ideas, and most of that comes from us. They're the parents or the elders of the children, where those that concepts are on. Great, good discussion on that, and then keep it in context of positive peace. The last of the 8 pillars, sound business environment. The question there is how the rights of others we just talked about, and sound business environment. How are these last two of the 8 pillars connected? Business and rights of others.
Well, I'd just like to say that there's been a lot lately, a lot of information, some recent books that have come out indicating that, you know, women do very well in business, and that businesses thrive when half of the board, at least half of the board of directors are made up of women, or a good majority are made up of women. And I just wanted to throw that in because I think I've heard this a long time ago, but there's more and more emphasis on this, that, you know, not just countries, but businesses thrive when they, you know, accept and embrace women. And so I think that's a really important message to get out to the business world, which is still vastly dominated by men.
Yep. Do we extend that further with other, those inner circle of our, thinking back of our circle in business is not just a gender mix in business, other diversity of race, religion, sexual orientation, and other types in the business.
Yeah, well, I would think so. I mean, we're, no matter, you know, what race or gender or, you know, any of those other elements of diversity, we're all consumers, and businesses are generally about selling something. So I would think if there's more diversity within a business, it's going to be more successful.
Yeah. And how would a business be more successful by increased diversity in their employees and their board directors, their management? How would that work? I mean, if you've got half the senior managers are women, there's a reasonable representation of other racial groups, Indigenous, Black, Asian. How does that help the business?
Well, if it's known, people from those minorities may feel more comfortable going into those businesses,
yeah.
And they may feel better.
Yeah, yeah. The products they may have into a new market. Maybe the products don't sell well with some groups. Products that sell well for men have to be marketed different to female customers. So the female managers, female board of directors would say, "Well, no woman's going to buy that." But if you sold it like this, I can't think of a particular example. Maybe you can, but I'm sure the same with different groups. A grocery store that has different types of food on the shelf that caters to the taste of different ethnic groups.
Well, just remember what happens when Tommy Hilfiger made that remark that his designs were not meant for Black women,
yeah,
for big Black women,
yeah.
And he had to backpedal PDQ.
Yeah,
Well, that happened for the yoga outfits.
yeah,
That,
Lululemon,
Lululemon, yeah.
Wilson.
But on the other extreme, MAC makeup demonstrated that men could wear it.
Yeah.
And that permitted a whole range of gender fluid people to now buy MAC products.
Yep. So it can be good for business. I thought we could probably say not can. It's always good for business.
There's another old example of if you'd had more diversity in the car industry. Chevy came out with a car that was, they wanted to call it Nova, and it was laughed out of Latin America because translated, that means it doesn't go. And so they wanted to call it Nova, but in Spanish, Nova means it won't drive. So the more diversity you have in there, the better you're going to be able to cover more customers.
Well, it brings a whole other layer of information.
Yeah. In Spain, there is a Toyota model called Pajero. And the word Pajero in Spanish means masturbator.
Whoops.
It didn't went well.
I think, Chris, you mentioned in the wheel that there was might have been a union affiliation piece of
sorry.
the pie. And I agree with you in the context of
The slides won't
sound
go.
business environment. It's been proven lately, not only that companies and businesses do well if they have women on their boards of directors, but they do well if they have union members on their boards of directors, because so many senior executives and privileged people don't really know what drives the worker on the floor or out in the yard to produce and take pride. But having a union member on the board of directors or several really opened people's eyes, and so the efficiency and the productivity of the companies started to go way up.
Yep.
Well, I can vouch for that in the sense that, for example, school boards, some school boards hired past union presidents as their human resources managers. And that creates a lot of goodwill, but also better management, because that the guy had been arguing the point on the other side, so he knows where the problems are and can be proactive in solving them before they become a problem.
Guillermo, when we get on to taking a look at the EU, could you take a look and see whether this still holds true? I did a business course 30 years ago, and at that time we compared North American business structure and European business structure, and the European boards always had workers on their boards. To my knowledge, North Americans never put workers on their boards, and I don't know if that still is true.
Well, that was the Volkswagen model.
Was pointed out as just
and
only.
Volkswagen is still, well, I think they are close to be the biggest car manufacturer in the world, the complex. They own Skoda, by the way.
And have great ads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just some of the factors we're talking about: business environment. Well, as you can see, the 8 pillars start to come to the well-functioning government, regulatory. Think of some of the problems Canadian business have in China with protection of intellectual property rights, or needing to share. In many countries, you can't open a business unless the government or other people are a certain share. So that can be plus or a minus. Free flow of information. Do you know what's going on? Price transactions versus that. The whole business of these 8 pillars. Education standards, is the pool of workers there? If you're in technology industry, are the resources there? As probably what we've learned in the last year is the market for some workers is global. We don't need to move people to where the business is. They can work from home more and more. And that's probably one of the accelerated what was going to probably happen. But it's going to be an interesting over the next decade of how much that influences a business and education and various all levels when the workers do not have to be at home or at a central office or central school or university. Infrastructure. Enforceable property rights, an interesting one. Who owns it? Who owns intellectual rights to the property? Who owns the factories? All those things make for influence positive peace.
What does enforceable mean, please? The existence of enforceable property rights.
Well, owning something versus can government take it away from you? Can somebody take your property away from you? Even in Canada, expropriation for, under certain circumstances, governments at all levels can expropriate your property, a real property. but this is getting into, I would guess, this is from the Institute for Economics and Peace, but I would guess they're also locking in the expanded version of property rights, not just real estate, but even the education. If your education can be taken away from it, where you have to be licensed. You know, we have some mobility problems in Canada with who is licensed from province to province.
But even let's say the copyright,
Yep.
infringement.
Yep.
Here in Canada, if I copy something, I don't respect the copyright rules. Okay, I can be sued.
Right.
In Chinese violate that all the time, and we have no way to enforce that right.
Right. So copyrights are different in different countries, how long they're good. If your degree, could be taken away from you, if you're licensed, can be taken away, and we take licensing requirements for bad behavior in Canada, but in some countries it's taken away for other reasons. For instance, going back to Europe in the 1930s, Jewish people had all their rights to practice law, medicine, commerce taken away in countries under Nazi rule simply because they were Jewish. Those things still exist in some countries, those problems. That's a long-winded answer to what is enforceable.
Thank you.
No, I think enforceable issues are very important. And you're right, Chris, it doesn't any longer pertain to real property or real estate. In fact, it more appropriately would pertain to intellectual property. And for a while, I think we Westerners thought that cause and effect would solve the problem with China, who have an insatiable appetite to steal our intellectual property wherever and whenever they can. But sadly, it hasn't worked out that way. They continue to steal intellectual property, but we're all now eager to do business in China. So what happened to cause and effect?
Yeah, I agree. And we were eager to buy it back from them. It's the final product.
Chris,
Yes.
where would one of the things we haven't touched on in the context of business and in rights is the notion of regional or local or individual businesses versus large businesses and even global enterprises, and the whole idea of monopoly and domination of markets. To me, it fits exactly in the juxtaposition of these two areas. What rights are we talking about as we see it increasingly these sort of
You're breaking up, Paulette.
We see these global monopolies. Okay.
Yeah, a different argument or a different discussion, but can you, legislate against a Walmart? Can you legislate against an Amazon and try to keep something that exists that is changing? Those are to me are always the debate. If we had tried to keep department stores, Woodwards and Eaton's and Sears, that were going away. I mean, we're really down to the Hudson Bay now, the only department store left in Canada. So it's a different market. I don't know if the Amazons and the Walmart are the future or a transition, and certainly some places have tried to legislate them away, only to see them pop up in a neighboring area. So,
Hudson's Bay is now owned by Macy's.
yeah, I don't think it's been owned by Canadians for a long time.
No.
But it's the only department, it exists, not just Canadian owned. What have we got in downtown Vancouver? We got the one that's,
Neiman Marcus.
yeah, a couple of near department stores. Yeah. Sue?
Another point to think about in all of this, if we see these great trends where the global companies are erasing borders, do we have to rethink this whole concept of nationalism and supporting one group of leaders under a given flag in a given geographical area over another group, or maybe several groups in there? Yeah, Guillermo.
Well, I was thinking of what is happening with Canada and COVID. Some years ago, a different administration let our pharmaceutical companies go. And we felt very safe because we could buy vaccines right, left, and center, and we signed the contracts, etc. And then suddenly nationalism has shown its face in the European Union, in India, and we may not receive the vaccines that we purchase. So nationalism is a double-edged sword, and there is something called national security. We should have a Canadian pharmaceutical industry. Okay, there are things that you cannot just relinquish because it's cheaper to produce abroad, and that was the creed until recently. We need to ensure that in case of emergencies, we can have our own supplies.
That's a whole huge thing, but it's fundamental to positive peace because it's not just what we make, it's our natural resources, as our First Nations are well aware. If you can't defend them for your own tribe, and I'm using tribe in the big global sense of it, then you don't have it. Whoever is bigger, more powerful will come and take it from you. And that's a whole nother big issue.
And then what happens when like with the new belt and the what do they call it, the new Silk Road and
the Belt and Road.
Yeah, and China has it's incredible, you know, the incursions that they've made and the investment in Africa. What the example in Athens, Piraeus, where the whole port has been redeveloped, and it's been developed by the Chinese, and as a result, anyone who's Greek that gets hired, they don't have any unions because the Chinese have dictated that they will provide work under the conditions from their own country. So when you were talking about this intersection, whatever it would mean, that the peaceful situation would mean that however things changed and evolved, it still needed to reflect the values and the needs of the country at hand. And if it's a country where port work has been a unionized endeavor, and now all of a sudden it's taken over, but the government handed it over without thinking about the full consequences of what it would turn into down the road.
Except the people who got the money when this transaction occurred.
Oh, yes. So
talking about corruption,
legislation, I guess I come back when I was thinking about large scale businesses entering a country. What they do is it governed by the legislation of the country. Canadians follow rules here, and then they go to other places, mining and so on, and they follow the lowest common denominator, whatever they can get away with over there. They don't bring the structures that we expect here in order to provide prosperity, peace, stability, and so on.
Yep. Yep.
Well, look at what the small businesses have been saying lately. Buy local, okay? Your local store contributes to the little leagues. Your local store pay taxes, okay, and sustain your community, okay? Amazon doesn't pay taxes anywhere.
No, I would disagree with that, but and making Amazon pay GST, they're not going to pay one more minute. You know, those and the people that shop at Amazon are going to pay the GST. How many jobs are in on the Tsawwassen First Nations? How many Amazon jobs are there? I think Amazon makes a huge contribution. How many of our neighbors work for Amazon in South Delta? There's hundreds of jobs on that warehouse on the First Nations. So they're, you know, they're supporting the Tsawwassen First Nations and creating hundreds of jobs. And there's more going into the old post office downtown Vancouver. So, you know, it's a delicate balance between those, you know, and I sometimes think shop local, there's also an obligation on the store to buy local. We can go into shops in Ladner, and I challenge you to find anything that's manufactured in Canada in the shops. We can go into restaurants in Ladner, and those French fries come from Washington State. But you know, South Delta boasts about how many potatoes we grow. So you know, there's, to me, there's a equal you know, obligation on businesses to sell local where possible. Like, you know, I appreciate we don't manufacture shirts and suits and blouses in South Delta.
But all the French fries from White Spot are local.
Okay.
Kennebec.
Good.
Okay. Anything else on business?
Just that we started with without defining what productivity was. And so therefore I feel that as we've gone along, the notion of productivity has evolved to the point, as you're saying, that it's productive if it supplies jobs and a living and supports the community, not necessarily makes profits, you know? It's much more complex. What is productivity?
Yep.
Yeah.
That last slide that you had, Chris, I wanted to ask, it was a circle. There's the sound business one. No, the next one. Sorry, the sound business one that you just, that's, nope. Go forward. Forward. That's it. Yep. The one just before this, yeah. I wanted to ask,
Sorry.
there's what I consider to be, it says that it's a peaceful environment. The one just before this.
Sorry.
That's okay, love.
This
There.
one?
In peaceful countries, yeah. That business competitiveness and economic productivity are both associated with most peaceful countries. I'm going to question this because I think the US has a lot going on there, and I don't think it's a peaceful place. And I wondered also, Israel has high competitiveness in its business and huge economic productivity, technologically, medically. It's quite productive, but it is not a peaceful place. So are there exceptions to this kind of thinking?
Well, remember these 8 pillars, they rate countries, and you read the first report, you know, if you go back on those reports you've read or looked at, the 8 pillars, one being high or low in one category doesn't bring you down. Because the country, the United States actually is fairly low on a positive peace.
132.
Yeah. So, but because the country's more productive or less productive, wouldn't they take the rating of all those 8 pillars in a variety, and each of the eight pillars has a number of factors that they bring together to come up with those ratings. So because a country is productive, Israel or the United States, or less productive, influences their rating, but doesn't totally skew the rating on one area unless it was hugely out of whack for some reason. And economic productivity, the economists can try to define that. I'm not going to try. Okay. And this, I think we've seen this diagram previously. The virtuous cycle and the vicious cycle of what these elements do in a community, in a society, for productivity. The term we were just trying to define for a positive peace. Okay, we've waded through the 8 over 3 days, 3 sessions, these 8 pillars in great detail. So the next part, and this is where we can decide to go to talk about these 8 pillars more and how we would implement projects. We can talk about the Columbia, those who read parts of the report I sent you on Columbia, or was it Brenda, you wanted to talk more about China? I'm easy, we got a short time left. Did you want to bring up some more points about China?
I don't think I was the one with China.
Oh, somebody, sorry, who was it?
I think I raised China, Chris,
Oh,
in to the extent that it's a dichotomy, and more we Western countries are seeing that despite what we thought would happen when China was brought into the United Nations and onto the Security Council and made part of the so-called free world business trade industry, the assumption was that the more they were exposed to Western production, consumerism, freedom of information, freedom of thought, that the more westernized they would become. And in fact, just the reverse has happened. They are still viciously communistically overpowered, and there is no freedom of thought or expression, but they're booming as far as their economy and their trade and their rise in stature as a world power. So how does that sit with positive peace? Because positive peace and a lot of the principles make sense to we as Westerners, and we can see where they have worked and to a greater or lesser degree. But how does that explain China?
yeah, well, I don't know if I have an answer. I don't know if anybody else has, but you could go through these 8 pillars and look at China and decide how many of them they follow. Very few of them. We can see with what's going on with the 2 Michaels there, with ethnic minorities in the country. We've already talked about intellectual property rights. Some of them certainly high human capital education, but even that is restricted to certain ethnic groups, access to parts of education. So yeah, it's a challenge. None of this is easy. None of this gives an answer to how to be peaceful. It tells you these 8 pillars are the answer to China. What it doesn't tell you is how to get there, how to nudge them, as the current slide. How do we nudge China towards low levels of corruption, sound business, acceptance of rights of others? How do we do that? for the last number of decades, it's been engage with them, talk with them, trade with them, educate back and forth. But as you say, the change hasn't come that we expected.
Well, if I am allowed, we took the assumption that our vision of capitalism will evolve in China the same way it evolved in England and the United States and the rest of the Western world. It wasn't their story. As a matter of fact, after this session, I will forward you a YouTube presentation by Bill Maher that I think I sent it to Kathy before, but is quite explanatory of many things that the Chinese do. But in any case, China has never been democratic. It wasn't democratic before Sun Yat-sen. It wasn't democratic with Chiang Kai-shek, and certainly not democratic since the communist rule. So what they have and what they decided to do was to modernize China, okay, and to increase their wealth. They didn't decide to become democratic at all, and so we enter on as I think I told you, we in South America say when you go to bed with a baby, you risk to wake up on a wet bed.
You're at home.
So we decided that it was a good idea to include China. We kicked out Taiwan out of the Security Council. We accepted the idea that Taiwan was not an independent country. Okay, so we are just harvesting our own mistakes.
I had a Chinese student with me who came to visit recently. She's graduated for now 2 years and has been attending university in Toronto. Her parents bought a condo just this side of UBC. So I asked her, I said, you know, Bessie, how do you reconcile in your mind what's occurring in China right now and your experience in Canada? How do you reconcile the behavior of your government? And she didn't go straight to the point, but in essence, she said, look, the government feels in order to keep a cohesive society, it has to be pretty, my word, draconian. The government has to get rid of dissent. And as a result, they have to take the Uyghurs into these re-education camps and re-educate them to think the way the Chinese, i.e. the Han, think about things. And so when you've got people even educated in Canada, she spent now 5 years in Canada, her parents, surprise, surprise, they want to buy property here. And yet that's her attitude. And I bet an awful lot of other Chinese attitudes. What are you going to do about that?
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think Guillermo's point is a good one. China wanted to join and to become more powerful, but they didn't join with us to democratize their country. They have little or no interest in democracy and at all levels of society. And you've just reinforced that, Sue. Except for those who grew up in Hong Kong under the British system, very few mainland Chinese have any great thirst for democracy. They don't really care. They want food on the table and a roof over their head and a reasonable expectation of basic human comforts, but democracy is not something they thirst for.
And they don't even understand it.
Maybe.
Chris,
Yes.
Chris, is there an example, like if we're looking at what you have on the screen and we imagine that that there's an area of the world that where it's very problematic, and an NGO is going to come in or whatever, or an international organization, say like Rotary, and make a difference to people's well-being and welfare. Is there an example of something that that has happened in the recent past that where some of these principles would have been in play?
Oh yeah, there's we probably haven't got time to go through the rest of this in detail, but certainly that report on Colombia shows us a whole series of young people implemented, being trained in these 8 pillars, positive peace. Projects in Uganda being fairly successful. Mexico training a large group of people in positive peace and then sending them out to do a variety of projects. Have these been used to change a whole country? No, but have they been used to nudge, as the word is there, pieces of a country? Yes, they certainly have, and they can. Colombia is a good example with the years of the FARC guerrillas fighting back and forwards, the narco drugs coming out of there, and they haven't all gone away. I understand that. But here's a country, Colombia, accepting, I think, more than 1 million Venezuelans have flowed across the border and are being accepted, not willingly maybe by all of the population, but a country that's struggling is accepting refugees from their neighbors. You know, I'm not sure Canada could or would accept 1 million refugees all at once from, you know, Democrats fleeing Trump or something. I don't know what scenario you could come up with.
Well, just look at the reaction when Dreamers and others were running away from Donald Trump's policies.
Yes.
Okay, and we cried foul in several provinces, demanded that the border was closed, etc. Now, but the Colombia case is quite remarkable because Colombia has been a society divided for almost 2 centuries since independence. Okay, after Bolivar's passing, okay, they went into a continuous civil war, and then the FARC came, and they complicated, and then the narco traffic sort of got involved. And the fact that that civil war stopped is almost short of a miracle.
Well, Guillermo, it's pretty simplistic, I think, to say that it stopped. The more that I'm reading and finding out about it, it's still a very divided population. When you read about the history and the voting, whether they should forgive the people who were in FARC, it didn't even quite pass. It was like a point whatever of the percentage, 50% this side, 50% that side.
Yeah.
And I watched a very interesting documentary of 2 young people who were supposed to be coming back into society. And when it was learned that they were ex-FARC, they had one heck of a time and were pretty much kicked out again.
But look what happens, for example, in Medellin. Okay, we all heard about the Medellin cartel 40 years ago. Okay, you could not walk in Medellin without sort of paying homage to the narco traffickers. Today, Medellin, the city of Medellin is one of the most peaceful cities in Colombia. Okay, and that happened with the vision of certain civic leaders. Okay, for example, they built a tram that goes from the downtown to the top of the hill where the narco traffickers used to rule. Okay, and provoke allow the people to move, to not be trapped in their own little communities around the city, etc. Look what is happening in Chile, for example, where from a country that was going very well economically and advancing back to democracy gradually, suddenly, okay, they let the narco traffic infiltrate the poor neighborhoods, and the disparity of income created this huge division. And so when in October 2019, there was this social upheaval, okay, suddenly they had groups, huge groups of people that had no allegiance to peace, society, or development because they had nothing to lose. And they destroyed and looted, etc.
It goes, Colombia is a good example, and I can't remember who said it, if it was Desmond Tutu or somebody else in South Africa. You can't have justice and peace. That reconciliation, forgiving the people that caused the problems, is part of the step, and that's the challenge in Colombia. Why half the population voted against it, and the government was as bad as the FARC. It was evil on both sides, and most of these peace agreements are forgiving the terrorists, and that's hard for people to accept. They want peace and they want retribution, they want justice, and it's very difficult. And most of the peace accords, even World War II, Japan, the emperor was not executed. Lots of people wanted the emperor of Japan hung, like some of the Japanese generals, and the Americans made the wise decision for reconciliation. And with hindsight, it was probably the right decision. They took all his power away, but he wasn't executed. And the same in Germany. Many of the high-ranking Nazis were executed, but not all of them. So it's one of those very difficult things when you come to peace, and that's on the negative side of peace. Those peace agreements are just on the negative side. All you've done is agree to stop shooting each other. Then you have to move to the positive peace side and start nudging these 8 pillars. And that's what is going on in Colombia now and other countries.
Chris,
Yes.
I read early on when I was reading about this that these principles, some of them were foundational principles with the United Nations. Is there a direct link between the positive peace model and the way the United Nations sets about its work?
I would guess. I'm no expert on the United Nations or the charter, the various charters in the UN, but acceptance of rights of others. There's a whole charter on that Eleanor Roosevelt was instrumental in working on in 1945, 49, whenever that acceptance of right of others. If we look at the 8, we can imagine which one, equitable distribution, the 17, what are the 17 UN goals called?
Global goals.
Global goals. Some of these fit into those 17. Good relations with neighbor, high, education. They may use different terminology in the UN, but they certainly, you could probably make them fit. And I think I'll try to look for it. I think I've seen those 17 goals with these 8 and sort of where they connect. in various ways. So it's certainly possible.
Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. Because I was going to just ask something related, but slightly different question. So I don't know. Maybe you should go ahead because I might change the.
That's all right. Go ahead.
Okay, just really quickly. When I was looking at the 8 pillars, I wasn't sure, does one of those include education? Because my late husband, who taught sociology, always said, when it comes to countries where there's poverty, education is so important for bringing people out of poverty. So I kind of quickly went through the PDF to see if I could see where that fit in. And I was happy to hear you mention it today, but
high levels of human capital is education, and you can see it. Education integrated into free flow of information. Can we have an educated population if the internet is cut off by the government? So it's not one. It's never one pillar of these 8. They're integrated. So education is certainly key.
Thank you.
I have a question, Chris. It's kind of basic. I think I've missed a point here. When I watched the, was it a video or the slides on Colombia, it seemed to be coming all for the youth. So are we expecting the youth, sort of like the Peace Corps, to start this positive peace throughout different countries, come from them? And so we have to wait till it trickles over to the older people to change? How does this work and where does it start? I can't get a handle on that.
Well, it depends how many. That Columbia one was a Rotary initiative, and they particularly used youth groups to do it. But you could use any. This group, this useful group we're talking to today, could implement something in South Delta if we wanted to. The Columbia project was initiated by the Colombian Rotarians after the Colombian Peace Accord. What could Rotary do? So they decided, and there's a younger group of Rotarians called Rotaractors, 18 to 30. And there wasn't enough of them in Columbia, so they recruited YMCA volunteers. So both of them had a network across Columbia. So first of all, they didn't have to send people out there. In all the major cities, there was Rotaractors, Rotary clubs, and YMCA. YMCA is particularly strong there. So they use them as education and training. So, and thinking that the younger people would accept it, the people our age, and that as Guillermo's rightly pointed out, multiple generations are entrenched in their view of who was right and who was wrong. And there's many ethnic groups in Colombia. It's not just Colombians, thinking of Colombians as one group. There's indigenous groups in there that were strongly discriminated against by the government or the FARC guerrillas.
So are you saying that would we say that in Canada we have positive peace, or are we still working toward it?
Oh, I'd say we positive peace, and the Institute for Economics and Peace rates us in the top 10. So, but could we do better? Sure, most definitely we could do. There's levels of corruption, access to information. We've got debates going on who should control internet. We had a court case over federal legislation to say that you couldn't criticize candidates during elections, and the courts thought the legislation went too far. So we've got some, but we do well in Canada, but we shouldn't be complacent. I'm cognizant of the time there, and we've come to an end. Let me just, I appreciate this is when Guillermo asked me to do this and we talked about this, I didn't know what to expect. Having talked about to very different audiences, and most of the audience that groups I've talked to, this had some basis in this and understood the relationship. So coming in cold with so different experiences, really made me study this stuff. And like most people that teach something, you come away having spent for the 90 minutes we spend today, I spend 2 or 3 hours trying to make sure I've got the answers, which you always come up with questions that I don't have the answers for. So I appreciate everybody's participation. I appreciate you taking there, and I'll any last comments?
Any last comment?
I want to know what you've learned, Chris.
Well, I learned that people are interested in this topic. We took on this, Rotary has a partnership, and we have a history of working in peace and working with this. So this come naturally to us. It's refreshing that there's people that aren't connected with Rotary that share these views or interested in them. So I learned that you can ask questions, you can debate these, that these aren't, you don't accept them without being convinced. And I think during this, some of you certainly brought up issues that are worth, and Brenda's had a ongoing discussion with Michael on some of these, which was healthy for him. He really appreciated this, and so it's been fun.
Well,
Great. Well done, Brenda.
Too much.
Thank you so much, Chris. We certainly had very good discussions, and we had a variety of points of views expressed here. I think that those 8 pillars give us some structure to if you want study or visualize how peace can be achieved, and certainly give us a reinforcement of our duty to work towards peace in any capacity that we can. And if anybody wants to express a last comment before we say goodbye.
Yeah, just thanks to Chris.
Thanks.
Thanks to all the work that you put into doing this, Chris.
Yeah,
Much
thank you very
appreciated.
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you
Good
very
luck
much.
with
Thank
your
you.
other courses, and good luck to all the Elder College. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
We would
For
love
all
to
your work,
invite
Guillermo.
you. We would love to invite you to stay connected with Elder College as well as a future potential presenter, or as a student, because you certainly have exemplified that learning is a lifelong process.
Yep.
Yeah, we've got to say that.
Well, go out and enjoy the sun, guys.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Take
Bye.
care, everyone. Bye now.
Kathy.
Yes.
Kathy,